During the 17th century, the Swedish Empire had developed into a major power and expanded into the Baltic and North Germany. However, this angered and worried some of their neighbours, Russia, Denmark, Norway and Saxony, who were in a personal union with the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. They saw the crowning of the teenage King of Sweden, Charles XII, in 1697 as the perfect opportunity to strike back and reclaim territory. They readied their armies and declared war on Sweden in February 1700, attacking on 3 fronts. However, the Swedes responded swiftly by first attacking Denmark. Their navy managed to outmaneuver the blockade and sent troops to Denmark, threatening Copenhagen and forcing Denmark-Norway out of the war in just a few months. So with the Danish front freed, Charles deployed his forces to relieve Narva, a city besieged by the Russians in the Baltic. Despite Tsar Peter's attempts to modernize his army, the Swedes won at the Battle of Narva, capturing a great deal of artillery and ending the Russian advance. Now Charles was free to pursue the Saxon armies, but this allowed the Russians to found the city of St. Petersburg on their conquered land in Ingria. Charles pursued the Saxons, winning successive battles until he finally took Warsaw in 1702. In 1704 he removed the Saxon king, Augustus II, from the Polish throne and installed a puppet king, a Polish noble named Stanislavin. This caused a civil war to erupt in the Commonwealth. The nobility who remained loyal to Augustus were more numerous and had the support of Russia and Saxony, but their advances on Warsaw were turned back, and their defeat at the Battle of Fraustadt in early 1706 allowed Charles to occupy Saxony and force them to surrender. So now only Russia remained in the war against Sweden. The fighting in Ingria had continued throughout this period, but strong resistance and poor logistics had caused high casualties for very little gained for either side. Peter the Great had offered to surrender all territory gained except St. Petersburg, but this was declined. Instead, with around 40,000 men, Charles launched an invasion into Russia in 1708, aiming to take Moscow. The Russians began to retreat, adopting scorched earth tactics, but this angered the Cossacks of Ukraine, who were now undefended, so they decided to join Charles's army. However, the Cossacks could only provide limited support, internal problems prevented Stanislav from sending Polish reinforcements, and the winter of 1709 was one of the coldest in history and the Swedes lost nearly half their army. So by the summer of 1709, after only making it into central Ukraine, they were soundly defeated by the Russians at the Battle of Poltava, and the Swedish army would later capitulate. Charles fled to the Ottoman Empire, a historic rival of Russia. The Russians demanded that he should be handed over, but the Turks continued to refuse. So, in November 1710, Tsar Peter launched an invasion of Ottoman Moldova. This, the Prut River campaign, however, ended in failure, and the Russians were forced to return Azov to the Ottoman Empire in 1711 as part of the peace treaty. But the Russians were having more success elsewhere. While they moved into Finland, where they committed great atrocities, they managed to bring Saxony and Denmark back into the war, and together they began to lay siege to Sweden's cities in Germany. Plus, with Charles gone, Peter was able to help Augustus take the Polish throne. Nevertheless, Charles remained in Ottoman territory, hoping he could convince them to attack Russia. This, as well as his debts, however, angered locals, and he and his small force of around 43 men were attacked by an army of 10,000 civilians and Janissaries in 1713. He fought bravely, albeit fruitlessly, and had to return to Sweden. Although he enjoyed some limited success on his return, the coalition against him grew when Prussia and Hanover, who were in a union with Britain, joined the war in 1715. But Charles still refused to make peace. By now he was too weak to challenge the Russians in the east, so in 1716 he launched an invasion into Norway, hoping to knock Denmark out of the war once again. Although he managed to occupy Oslo, he eventually had to retreat. He tried again 2 years later, but was killed during this campaign. Also, during the army's retreat, the winter cold killed thousands, forcing Sweden to make peace. But distrust amongst coalition forces led to separate peace treaties. The Danes took Schleswig, Russia gained parts of Swedish Pomeranian, Hanover took Bremen-Verden, and Russia got all of Sweden's Baltic territory and Ingria. The Russian Empire was proclaimed and they forever became the dominant power in the region. Sweden would later try to reclaim their territory, but their failures finally cemented the end of the Swedish Empire. Nevertheless, this helped bring about increased civil rights and parliamentary governance in their Age of Liberty.